Oi oi rat bags, it's Jade. Welcome to a video that's going to be controversial. You'll be angrily typing, I'm sure, in just a few moments. It is the top 10 worst survival games. The games that I really deem as just not worth your time anymore, or mine. You probably won't see a lot of these games on my channel ever again, unless anything really changes. There's a couple here that have got the ability maybe to make things good in the future. Obviously it's opinion based, don't get salty. If you disagree, pop your reason down below, tell me your worst free survival games. I base my criteria on value, how much we're getting from the game. Are they doing right fairness with DLC or microtransactions? Service, how long we're getting updates for. Is it a big game that you should expect updates for? And then obviously gameplay, the most important feature. Is it actually fun to play? So that's my three criteria that I've judged all the console games available. I will have one separate for PC users in the future, but that's going to be a bit more mathematical as I'll be going probably off the Steam reviews. This is just my opinion really though on console games. Why I just have fallen out of love with some of these, or why I just won't really ever touch them again. So let's go! Survival games are pretty original normally. They come from these smaller development teams that really don't have licensing, so they often make up their own stories, their own characters. So when you go ahead and you get one of the most beloved franchises in the last 30 years and you try and make it into something it isn't, you do get a lot of blowback. And that's exactly what happened with Metal Gear Survive. Released over 4 years ago now, this game was crucified. Metal Gear Solid fans didn't like it, survival fans didn't like it. Why? Because it was simply too grindy, too monotonous, and just boring, quite frankly. The grafting, the gathering resources, the loops are there. You go out into the world, you get stuff, complete missions and then defend or help your base against these weird alien-like creatures. Maybe it would have been okay, or maybe it would have been given a kinder launch and review if it didn't have the Metal Gear Solid name attached. But then it probably would have just been a janky State of Decay rip-off, and that's what I feel you get with Metal Gear Survive. It did have an interesting take with the 4-player co-op, if only the rest of the game was as interesting. Oh yeah, and it probably didn't help that you needed an always online connection even when playing on your own. So yeah, no hope for this one, no future content, and I'm sure they're never going to do a sequel. But you never know, Konami have done stranger things. I might get accused of being way too harsh with this one, as Last Oasis is still in game preview on Xbox, it hasn't even released on PlayStation, so very much a game in development. But 2 years on, the game is still in just massive flux. It just hasn't had an audience that's kept up with the game. They've lost players left, right and centre ever since its launch, and the recent changes that I was praying would rejuvenate this, it just simply isn't working. So the problems they had: PvP was too much focus, not enough activities to do outside of ganking other players. The core concept of the game is that you build up these walkers, you go from sort of server or tile map to each different tile map to gather resources to build up even stronger walkers and take care of other players. You can have huge massive clans, massive networks. You're meant to be able to trade with other players if that's not your bag, and they've been adding slowly PvE content, but it was never enough. Players were just simply too bored. The game was pretty buggy, they made substantial changes. They went silent for a big long time and then said that they were coming out with their brand new season that was going to revolutionise the game, that was going to be more focused on PvE, more new creatures to be added, and they're going to make it less focused on being part of a mega clan. Sadly, what that's meant so far in the last month since it launched is a real grind fest. They've taken away really that urgency in getting walkers, they've made it a proper slog to get your first one, and after that they become nothing more than pack mules. The PvE content, the new creatures, the new mechanics they were going to add, half of it hasn't really materialised just yet as they're rebalancing. Like I said, I'm being harsh, but they've had 2 years to maybe rescue and get this game a little bit better, and the reviews on Steam are pretty telling. Not to mention the player base, the actual numbers. Now I don't have access to that on Xbox, but if it's as bad as it is on Steam, then this game, which is meant to house thousands of players all at one time, is really struggling. Out of all of the games on this list, it's the one I really want to turn things around. I'm hoping and praying they can do so. I was going to cover the new season, but I took one look at the feedback after the first few days and just decided it's still not ready yet to really revisit. But yeah, I think it's still got potential. I love the idea of walkers. The focus should always be on them to be your mounts, to be your battle weapons, but at the moment it's just a bit long and grindy. But not in the good survival way that so many of us survival fans love. They've got time, it's still in early access. I'm hoping they can get things right and we see a really fantastic PvP, PvE survival game in the future. You might think it's a bit of a joke including something like Unturned, but it's got a huge following, and for years it offered a kind of more family friendly PvP survival experience on PC. So when I found out it was coming to console, I thought, okay, this could be good, this could be interesting. Forget the cartoony graphics. Is it going to be like a DayZ experience? Kind of. When it launched, it had substantial issues, lots of bugs, lots of problems, and then they didn't really update the game very efficiently after that. They also charged money for it, a free-to-play game on PC, yet they were charging like $15, $20 or so for some skin packs that you had to buy, you couldn't play it without. So after the slowness of fixing certain things, they've now changed developers. They had a port team in FunLabs taken on board, and they really didn't do the good job enough, I guess, as they moved over to another team earlier on in the start of this year. Since April though, there's been no updates, no content drops, no news about what's coming. They have added new maps and they have had some bug fixes and improvements over the last year and a bit since it launched, but I would still say it's a pretty poor return, especially when you factor in how much the game cost. How hard is it to mess up a port? Apparently Unturned did it pretty poorly. So another technically early access game, but it's been in early access like 3 years now and it's still getting updates. In fact, it's had the most updates it's ever had in the last year, really trying to push this game forward. Of course, I am talking about Atlas. You're watching my parody trailer that I made in Ark because that's where it originally started, as a mod that was going to be as part of Ark Survival Evolved or some sort of DLC. The devs felt they could flesh it out even more, and so they made it into its own separate studio and separate game, allegedly. Coming out literally just when Extinction had finished the last known DLC we thought we was going to get for Ark, it seemed like they'd be moving on to this, but because of its failure they went back to start making content on Ark, and they actually took away resources from Atlas, moving a lot of their team over to help finish one of the DLCs. So they had no updates for 6 or 7 months, creative leads came and went, and Atlas kind of stalled massively. But as said, last year they've had content, they have, and they're really trying to make a lot of changes and improvements. It could be one of the games that comes good, but there's still something very sour about Atlas, and that's why I'm not touching it. The most recent addition to my shit list, and I reckon I'm going to get the most flack for this one, Conan Exiles, no doubt about it, was a great little contender for a decent survival game as opposed to Ark. Back in the day when Ark was ruling on Xbox and PlayStation, there weren't that many other survival games happening. Conan came along and it was janky, buggy, but it was definitely still something worth playing. It gave us PvP, PvE, big base building, in fact better base building than Ark in my opinion. I voted it 2 years running as better than Ark Survival Evolved. Once they came out of early access, they had regular updates, decently priced DLC that seemed fair, giving you access to new build pieces, armors and weapons that didn't affect gameplay as much. So how's it gone so wrong for Funcom? Well, they have been bought over by Tencent. It has to be something to do with that, why they've added these shitty MTX and Battle Pass systems. We'll come more to that in a second, but even before this, 2 years of no decent updates for Xbox and PlayStation, 6 months of leaving Xbox players crashing constantly. Even before then, they had a year without avatars on the systems, a core component of the game. So after 2 years of really shit support, really shit updates, taking forever to add the PC components they had, they then come out with a Battle Pass system, primarily aimed at console kids that don't have access to mods, and it's an absolute rip-off. You've got stuff in there for $20 or so that is literally amounting to a couple of skins or cosmetic items to place. Even outside of the MTX shop, the Battle Pass system itself is filled with kind of just generic filler that has no real value. All this on top of a paid game. If this was free to play, if they went that step and made Conan free to play, I probably wouldn't have bitched as much. If the MTX items had been maybe 3/4 of the price that they are, I probably wouldn't have moaned so much. But when you stack up what they were offering before compared to what they're offering now, it's an absolute cash grab and rip off. On top of all the other stuff that's gone wrong with all the bugs and issues that Conan still has to this day, no improvements for PlayStation 5 either. Yes, they've added some free content in the sorcery update and it does look great, but people are already starting to say it's just kind of not needed. It's doing stuff that, yeah, helps out a little bit, but it's not something absolutely essential in turning Conan into a great survival game once more. Given sorcery was meant to arrive during early access, it's taken nearly 5 years to finally add it, and they've done so by adding all this other crap that has resulted in a PC Steam review bomb of 30%, sitting at 58% now positive. That's a huge swing, and really showing it's not just me that has an issue with Conan, it's a whole ton of people. So yeah, it's a shame. One of the best. I originally said I'd put it in my top 5, but no longer anymore. Will not support this game going forward, and be very lucky if I ever talk about Funcom in a positive way in the future again. I'm going to be the first to admit I probably take too much stock in how games price stuff and what they do with content in terms of updates. I know a lot of you guys are really just happy to play your favourite survival game, and as long as it can play and doesn't crash too often, you're happy enough because you love the premise, the basic core concept. And that's what we have with 7 Days to Die, one of the most beloved survival games over the last few years, but it's been one of the most slowest going in terms of development, and they've never got it completely right. It's coming up to 10 years the game's been in alpha, and there's still no release date in sight for 1.0. Now on PC they've had regular updates, usually once every year, that offer big massive content, and that's mostly kept them happy. On console it's been 5 years. The collapse of their publisher Telltale Games really left Fun Pimps in the lurch. But that was nearly 4 years ago now. Since then Fun Pimps have had control, and they've had a bunch of mixed messaging. At first saying they wouldn't be able to update the game until PC went gold, which they're still kind of sticking to. They did say they then wouldn't be able to maybe update older gen consoles, that they'd only be looking at making a brand new version of the game on Xbox Series X and S and PlayStation 5 in the future. I've done plenty of videos discussing this matter over the years, but in recent times they changed their tune. They've got on board some dedicated console port workers to help them, and it seems like they are now suggesting they may be able to back port the updates, so that finally Xbox and PlayStation fans can get some of the content that PC have had over the last 5 years. If that happens, I will gladly revisit it and I will start playing 7 Days to Die once more, but I haven't touched it and I won't touch it until I see a free update for everyone that owns the game already on console. That aside, the concept of 7 Days to Die is still there. You can still have a bunch of fun with friends as long as it's not kicking them out every 2 minutes. There are substantial crashes still that wipe worlds, but it is still one of the most compelling survival experiences you can play, even in its antique state on console. So as long as they stick to what they tentatively have said in the last year, then I should hopefully one day maybe cover this again. How hyped as console fans would you be to get an update for free for your version? On to the last 4 now, and the next 3 games are actually more about how they play than anything else. They're just simply not that great. Ancestors, Humankind, Odyssey promise the tale of you, progressing you and your clan through the ages as you learn and master new techniques to become and evolve. It did have an interesting premise, but it's always hard to beat a survival game where you're controlling creatures, and they kinda just settled on the most boring, monotonous gameplay loops you'll ever have played. Overly hard, really tough to get into, and just so repetitive. Using multiple different buttons just to learn how to pick up a stick and find out the memory points and the synapses in your brain triggering, etc. It just became a bore fest very quickly. Fair play for the developers, led by an ex-Assassin's Creed creator, to really get behind something a bit different and a bit new. They had hot fixes and stuff, but no real new gameplay afterwards. I don't think they even bothered with DLC. I don't think the game actually did that bad in terms of sales. It got a big help, I think, from Epic Games as well. But yeah, I'd be surprised if we see a full-blown sequel to this one in the future. Quite a few survival games on console have been ported over by Fun Labs, a crew out of Romania development team, and this was their first game on their own, I do believe, in a long time. Open Country. It seemed to have promise. Being a hunter, you got a doggo, go and get your stuff, make sure you got food and water as you explore all sorts of different scenarios as well as a fairly large map. But so much of the fun stuff was locked hours into the game, like even having an ATV. Tired, monotonous missions and really full of bugs, especially on console, where they never really got to grips in fixing them. They only had one hotfix before suddenly announcing that the studio would no longer be supporting the game going forward. This is the second of 3 games published by 505, so they haven't got a stellar record in supporting survival games. Either way, it was a bit of a shame. A little bit of promise here from a small team that have got years of experience, but the game ended up looking like it belonged on the Xbox 360. Open Country was a game that should have been made way back then, and it could have been successful, but yeah, the quick abandonment of it definitely felt like a cash grab. Memories of Mars is the 3rd game published by 505 after Unturned and Open Country, and yep, it bombed massively. The concept was great, Rust in space pretty much, PvP, dedicated areas to fight other players, gather resources, build up your base, get access to new upgrades and go and fight mechanoids and robots. It was a surprise when it launched on console though. PC development had kind of slowed very much down, they hadn't really ever done well on PC, not even more than a few thousand playing it at launch. Massively undermarketed and basically just the wrong way of doing stuff, with seasons that wiped players' progress as they introduced new mechanics. Some of that stuff you can forgive for a small little indie team in early access, but when they then launched the game as a fully complete one on Xbox and PlayStation, it was a bit eyebrow raising. With the console launch, they changed up how you play the game. They removed all of the PvP components other than certain areas that you could fight, effectively making it more of a Care Bear PvE PvP game. And this exposed how little content there really was in the game, repeatedly just going to the same sort of style cities and gathering the same resources, not to really get too much further into it. There weren't that much to do, there wasn't a huge amount of bosses or unique stuff to take on. A few skirmishes with the players you could find on servers was about all the game had. And once again, as soon as the game pretty much came out, 3 months later with only maybe one hotfix, the developers said they'd quit working on the game. They were no longer actually a company and it had been dissolved. 505 washed their hands, wouldn't support any ongoing complaints, and that was it for Memories of Mars, a ghost town of a game that you can still jump on servers now, hosted by really hardcore players, but it's a terrible letdown for a game that had a little bit of promise. So what's number one? Probably the best game you can play on PC. Objectively, I know some people would still disagree with that, but no doubt about it. On PC, Rust is amazing. Frequent updates, compelling content, all the trademarks of what you want in a decent survival game. The console version is like the Wish version of anything. Absolute trash FPS on older gen consoles, and even on newer gen it's not that amazing. The desync and lag in firefights involving more than 2 players is absolutely horrible, and it's absolutely years behind the PC version. When it launched, it was actually 2 years behind with content, so you expect that content to arrive rapidly, pretty soon, right? In the 15-16 months it's been live, they're only just getting their 3rd major content patch, adding proper, actual decent stuff to do. It took them nearly 8 months to launch oil rigs, and most recently they've just added the cargo event, so finally some actual decent content. But they're still missing electricity, they're still missing a whole bunch of monuments that were there somehow in beta testing but have been forgotten about or not re-added back in. I was hyping this up as going to be the Ark killer on console. I imagined console kids would love this game so much and it would overtake Ark as the #1 most played on a system. I wasn't anticipating how poor the game played, nor the blatant cash grabbing. I've never seen anything as bad as I have with Rust in terms of survival. 3 different versions that you could buy, more expensive editions promising you more skins, but also locking behind test servers. Something no other game has really done in survival space. You usually get to test and help developers find bugs for free, but nope, not available on the base version of the game, which is already more expensive than the PC version. A core component of games like these, basically effectively giving players pay to win, experience and time to get used to new areas, new items and more. After promising that community servers would launch straight after their actual full launch, turns out nope, still no community servers 15 months on, so you still got to play on official where everyone's getting ganked with servers and maps really just not fit for older gen, but that is still their problem. They should never release the game on older gen if they couldn't handle it. Just like CONAN Exiles, they've got their own coins and absolutely atrocious price gouging with skins that they seem to care more about each week than giving actual news about incoming content. If they'd put this as an early access title, I'd probably still be playing it right now. I could forgive them so much, but they charged full price, they added so many microtransactions straight away, an absolute cash grab. I will be taking no further questions, Your Honour. Agree, disagree, pop your comments down below and let me know why I'm so wrong about my top 5, top 3 or any of the games in the list. Tell me your worst survival games if they're not here and why. As I said, look out for the Steam version, which will be pretty different as I am going to be going by the reviews and giving you a breakdown of why they're rated as some of the worst survival games you can play. I never want games to fail, I never want games to do bad. I'll always give other games certain chances to retry stuff and maybe see if they've come good. No Man's Sky is one of the best cases for that. Even Ark Survival Evolved, a game I have criticised massively in the past, has turned things around a lot. There is hope for some of these games to do good. What they need to do more of is less focus on quick ways to earn money, really take on board player feedback, and make sure that their game is priced fairly and we know everything we need to know about the game as it's launching. So until next time, Ratbags, I'll see you later.